I'm Jackie. Today I'm going to present some information for you on teaching a two-part lesson, and this information comes from the handy-dandy book Communicate Strategies for International Teaching Assistants. That's you. So today we're going to chat about how to do a two-part lesson. So first off, what is a two-part lesson? It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's putting a lesson into two different parts. So if you have a longer lesson with a lot of information that you want students to really understand, the best way to do it is to start it off within two segments. Don't try to get everything into one session and cram it all in, but plan it instead to take place within two different class periods. So that means that for the first bit, you're going to be planning in half of your material that you want to cover in your first section. So in order to do that, we're going to have to think of some different things, like how much material we want to cover each day, and ways that we work on previewing. So previewing means kind of like in the movies, when you send a preview to see a movie. So it has a trailer where we're kind of getting to understand what's coming, what the movie's about. It doesn't give away everything, but it just kind of creates interest. So we're going to do that at the beginning in order to do that for what we're going to be covering in class that day, but we're also going to preview as well for what's going to happen in the next class. And then next we're going to chat a little bit about time restraints. So obviously one of the biggest problems for teachers and issues that students have to face are time restraints in the classroom. So if you're like me, you might teach 50 minutes per day for 3 days a week. So in order to do that, I have to really think about how much time I want to devote for each little thing I talk about. So we're going to chat about that just for a short little thing. And then we're also going to ask ourselves some questions to think about whenever we're teaching a two-part series like this. So first things first, let's talk about previewing for this class. So whenever you start for a first lesson and you have your first day's content, we need a preview. So in order to do that, we can ask our students some questions. We can also paraphrase things using phrasing things, using expressions in order to create interest for what's to come. So we can say certain things like, well, today we're going to be covering blah, 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 blah. Or in this class, we're going to be chatting about this. In order to do this, and this goes within any presentation you ever make, in any sort of public speech you may give, kind of letting your audience or your students know what they're about to hear really creates interest, and it also makes them feel like they understand what's going on. If you seem to be scattered all over the place, it's going to really make your audience feel uncomfortable and not know where this class or your presentation's headed. So kind of giving a brief overview makes them feel really secure. This is what we're going to talk about. I know about how long it's going to take, and my speaker or my teacher knows what they're doing and that they've prepared. So having words and phrases like, today we'll be covering, or in class this week, we're going to be talking about this, this, and this. Using phrases like that are a really good way to do that. Another way that you can do it is through rhetorical questions. So if you've heard of a rhetorical question, that means a question that someone poses that is, that the person who poses that question doesn't expect an answer. So, for example, you could ask a question to your class and then pause, not expecting an answer back, and then start generating the answer for them. This thing works really, really well in large classrooms. So for example, if you're a teaching assistant in a large biology classroom, for example, that has 300 students in it, you're probably not going to ask a whole lot of specific questions, because in such a huge class, it would be hard to really answer that many questions all the time. So doing something like this, you could say something like, so why did we think that this sort of thing happened? Pause. Well, it's because blah, 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 blah. Or due to the fact that blah, 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 blah. In order to do a rhetorical question, you need a pause beforehand to kind of set up that this question's different than other questions. So I'll start, I'm talking, and then I'll pause, and then something like, so why do we think that prepositions are difficult for international students? Pause, again, get your students to think about the answer and think about what they would say, and then say your actual answer. Well, it's because blah, 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 blah. Okay? So this is a good way to kind of preview this is probably what we're going to start talking about. So you're doing this question, and in posing this question, you're getting students to think about content without having to actually raise their hand and say information. However, you're making them active participants in your classroom, even in a large classroom. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is time. So within a 2-part lesson, one thing that's really difficult is time. So if you're teaching 50 minutes, like I said earlier, what I like to do is have an allotted time for each activity that I'm planning to do. So if I'm planning a lecture that's going to take place within 2 class periods, I have to really think about how much time I want to allot to each specific thing. So for example, I might go ahead and put something like, I want to spend 10 minutes on theory. Then the next thing after that, I want to spend the next 10 minutes talking about some explanation of procedural things, okay? So in order to do that, you have to go ahead and plan exactly how much time you think. And that's just in a perfect world, you'll follow exactly that, but sometimes things get a little bit off course, and that's okay. However, having that initial plan is really important because sometimes without planning things ahead of time, we really have no idea how long something's going to take. And if you have that basic structure thought out, you'll be able to really figure out what's important and what's not. What sort of information do you really want to cover? And that's what's important when we talk about time and planning. What we're really talking about is getting the most bang for our buck for our students. So we want to make sure that they are receiving the most important information, that they're really understanding the basics, and that you're getting across what you really want to get across in the amount of time that you have to offer them. So one thing that's important is making basically an outline or a lesson plan that says how much time you're allotting to each thing, and basically asks you the questions of, why is this important? Why does this matter? Think while you're writing your lesson plans for this week, think about, why do I want to say this one thing? Why do I need to spend 10 minutes on this? Is it that important? And if it is, then make sure that you're generating and giving more time to that sort of thing, to that sort of part of your lesson. So throughout all of this, we have a couple of questions that we have to ask, and that's really related to what's important. Why is this important for my students? What's the reason that I'm teaching this? Why is this meaningful? And in order to do that, we really need to think about also things like, why is this interesting for my students? Or this information is important. How can I make it really come across in a clear way and in a way that makes students interested in the subject? Now this happens for not just our students, but also anytime we give a presentation or a public speaking event or something like that. We really have to spend some time to generate interest and make our audience really care about what we have to say. We have to at least spend some little moment either giving a hook or something that's going to really create interest in what we have to say. So that's all I have for you today. Today we covered doing a 2-part lesson. So the beginning of that is just understanding that for your first lesson, to begin a 2-part lesson, you have to cover half of your material in one class. In doing so, you have to use previewing. You have to preview what you're saying for this class period, using expressions, maybe rhetorical questions in order to do so, and then also previewing for the next class period and using expressions that'll be helpful in order to create interest for what's coming up. The next thing that's really important is planning things out. So having a good sense of timing and figuring out how much time you want to allot to all of this. And then lastly, it's really asking yourselves questions throughout this whole planning process. So as you're planning something, think about, why is this important? Or how can I generate interest in my students? How can I make them really care about what I have to say? And is this thing that I'm planning really beneficial to them? Is this a good way to spend their time? So I hope you guys have great luck this week and have fun. See ya.